Hello, in this video we will understand about the pharmacology of emesis, the emetic reflex, and we will understand about the drug therapy, how to control the vomiting. So first of all, we should need to understand the emetic reflex, how vomiting can occur. This the higher brain cortex will give the signal to the pons, which that contain a vomiting center. This vomiting center will trigger through a muscarinic receptor are present in the vomiting center. This muscarinic receptor is important for the triggering uh, bind with the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. This muscarinic receptor are basically triggered by the different mechanism, but also another chemoreceptor trigger zone, for short CTZ. This chemoreceptor trigger zone is the dopamine 2 receptor and 5-HT serotonin receptor. This 5-HT serotonin receptor and the dopamine 2 receptor are present in the chemoreceptor trigger zone. This is the chemoreceptor trigger zone. The blood-brain barrier are not present. So it means the outside of the blood-brain barrier. In this way, the cytotoxic agent directly contact with the chemoreceptor trigger zone, and also the dopamine 2 receptor receive the dopamine or the serotonin will trigger to stimulation the vomiting center to the vomiting reflex. The emotional factors, pain, smell, and the smoking, the repulsive sight, and bad thinking as well as bad visualization or hearing, which that will lead to trigger the vomiting center through a muscarinic receptor for the stimulation. The acetylcholine neurotransmitter bind with a muscarinic receptor to vomiting center trigger. The vomiting reflex will occur. On the other hand, the motion sickness, the vestibular nuclei, the balance through a semicircular canal will not balance during the motion sickness during the traveling time. The vestibular cochlear nerve 4, which that will lead to target to the vestibular nuclei. But the vestibular nuclei contain muscarinic receptor and the histamine 1 receptor. This vestibular nuclei will trigger the muscarinic receptor, will lead to acetylcholine, will bind with the muscarinic receptor to stimulate the vomiting center, as well as the CTZ, the chemoreceptor trigger zone. The vestibular cochlear nerve 3, which that 4, which that will lead to trigger the vomiting center, but also the histamine 1 receptor is triggered via a allergic reaction. This allergic reaction is due to the mast cell degranulation by the response of the allergens. This response of the allergen will lead to degranulation of the histamine, will target to the histamine 1 receptor. When target to the histamine 1 receptor at the vestibular nuclei will trigger the vomiting center directly or indirectly. Indirectly mean the CTZ stimulate. On the other hand, the cytotoxic agent will directly contact because the blood-brain barrier outside for the chemoreceptor trigger zone. In this way, the vomiting reflex is due to the vomiting center will transmit the signal toward the diaphragm will contract, while on the other hand, the another thing is that the relaxation of the digestive system will occur, and the inside is the food which that is basically sometimes toxic, and in this way the here is the gastric pit which that's contain here is the enterochromaffin cell. This enterochromaffin cell will contact with the chemical inside is the lumen, will lead to, for example, the cytotoxic agent will lead to trigger and produce the serotonin 5-HT. This serotonin basically a target to the 5-HT3 receptor of the vagal nerve, the vagal sensory nerve. This is the 5-HT3 receptor will trigger, and in this way the vagal nerve will a parasympathetic afferent sensory nerve which that stimulate. On the other hand, the blood which that is the smoking will enter the nicotine will lead to nicotine receptor will trigger the parasympathetic nerve fiber, this vagal nerve, and the chemotherapic agent directly. In this way, this will lead to parasympathetic afferent sensory nerve will target to the vomiting center. This vomiting center target due to the releasing of the neurotransmitter, the acetylcholine, and target to the muscarinic receptor. When target to the muscarinic receptor will lead to vomiting center activation. This vomiting center will transmit the signal through a neuron. The neuron can be a motor autonomic neuron. This motor autonomic neuron is the sympathetic fiber or parasympathetic fiber, but this is the autonomic. Will lead to contract the diaphragm. It means contract the diaphragm means it is the sympathetic, and in this way the basically is the emesis will occur due to the shortness of the peritoneal cavity, the abdominal cavity will lead to circular muscle relax and contract. The antagonistically will lead to antiperistaltic movement against the peristalsis, like the for normal is the peristalsis, and it is against the gravity. Anyhow, I hope you make sense about the emetic reflex, how emetic reflex can occur. But now we will understand about the drug target. The promethazine is the H1 receptor, the histamine 1 receptor, and it is the antagonist. Promethazine and hydrochloride, which that is antagonist and the H1 blocker will lead to block the histamine 1 receptor. It means it is the anti-allergic and also used for the anti-allergic but also used for the vomiting inhibition, because the histamine 1 receptor will trigger the vestibular nuclei to trigger the vomiting center and the chemoreceptor trigger zone. On the other hand, the 5-HT3 receptor, the serotonin receptor antagonists, it is used for the ondansetron. This ondansetron is basically will trigger the it will use for the control nausea and vomiting and gastrointestinal tract. This ondansetron. On the other hand, let's understand about the dopamine 2 receptor antagonist. This dopamine 2 receptor antagonist is the antipsychotic. This enzyme is known as it is antipsychotic, and the dopamine 2 receptor antagonist is the paradigm or the enzyme or and chloropromazine. On the other hand, the second one is the dopamine 2 receptor antagonist, which that is against the dopamine 2 receptor. In this way here you can see this is the second one drug is the metoclopramide injection. It is basically the metoclopramide is the target to also the dopamine 2 receptor, but also the another drug, and it is metoclopramide is also a target to the gastrointestinal wall, which that will lead to inhibit the dilation and the antiperistalsis. Also, the basically the droperidol is the D2 antagonist. Inhibit the schizophrenia is important, but it is also target to the metoclopramide like gastrointestinal tract, and on the other hand, the dopamine 2 receptor. Ondansetron is the ondansetron is the another drug which that target to the vagal nerve, ending of the vagal nerve from the beginning, the 5-HT3 receptor antagonist, which that inhibit the parasympathetic nerve fiber firing to the vomiting center. In this way, the vomiting reflex will inhibit. The muscarinic receptor antagonist is the acetylcholine antagonist. Acetylcholine against the acetylcholine binding is the iusine is important, which that is inhibit the muscarinic receptor of the vomiting center will lead to vomiting reflex inhibition. The promethazine is the motion sickness and morning sickness importance for this drug, and the drowsiness and sedation is a side effect. Antiemetic is the antiemetic, the ondansetron is the good for chemo and the radiation, chemotherapy and radiation, and post surgery. The side effect is the headache and gastrointestinal upset. D2 receptor antagonist, the azine, is the prochlorperazine is the good for chemotherapy and radiation, and also block the muscarinic receptor H1 receptor. Sedation and the hypertension is important for this dopamine 2 receptor antagonist. The metoclopramide is the good for chemotherapy and radiation patient, and it is the side effect is the gastrointestinal problem. While this muscarinic receptor antagonist is the prophylaxis and motion sickness and dry mouth and drowsiness. The prophylaxis is basically for all drug. Remember that things. Anyhow, I hope you make sense about that. Let's understand about the side note for the emetic reflex, how it can occur another way. The autonomic nervous system basically contain a sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. So, in this way, the parasympathetic nervous system will create the salivation. After the salivation, the emetic reflex will increase. After the emesis, the mouth will be dry, and that is why the dry mouth will lead to inhibit the parasympathetic nervous system. That is why the last point for the vomiting is the sympathetic nervous system activation. This sympathetic nervous system activation will lead to inhibit the parasympathetic nervous system activation and decrease the digestion and acid secretion, but the stimulate the saliva, but sometimes not. Emetic reflex will occur due to the inhibition of saliva, but before the emesis, the saliva will produce. Anyhow, the saliva will produce due to the lubrication increase in the gastrointestinal tract for the emission. Thanks for watching. If you like my video, please make sure to subscribe, like, and share. See you in the next video for this time. Bye.